Thank you for staying tuned. The International Monetary Fund has urged the Nigerian government to enhance food security, reduce fragility as part of efforts to improve the country's growth. This recommendation is contained in a statement released following the conclusion of the IMF Executive Board's 2025 Article 5 constitution with Nigeria. The board highlighted priorities for government, including addressing security challenges, cutting bureaucratic red tape, improving agricultural productivity, and bridging infrastructure gaps in electricity. The financial institution acknowledged the successful implementation of significant reforms over the past 2 years, commended improvements in macroeconomic stability and resilience. I have joining me the President of Capital Markets Academics of Nigeria, Professor Uche Owaleke, live from our Abuja studios. Prof, good afternoon and thank you so much for joining the show.
Yeah, good afternoon, Tolu. Indeed, my pleasure.
Prof, let me ask you, when you saw this report, how did it come to you? A lot of issues raised here, reviewing the 2025 budget, averting crisis, financial issues that needs to be addressed, issues around agriculture, electricity shortfall and all of that. So where do we start from? Which really strikes you in your understanding?
Well, I think the report by the IMF team, I would say, is balanced, and on the average, favorable. But before I even, come to that, let me also say that, of course, we know that as part of the Article 4 IMF agreement, with the member countries, there is this bilateral discussions that they usually have with, the member countries, once every year. And that of this year, 2025, according to the report, took place between April 3 and, April 15, during which time they met with the finance minister, coordinating minister for the economy. They also met with the governor of the central bank. And according to that report, they also met with a number of, stakeholders, including the ministries of agriculture, or Minister of Agriculture, Petroleum, Power. They also met with, some civil society groups. But I also think, this is by way of advice now to the IMF, that in order to make the consultation a lot more inclusive, it's important too that in their future engagements, they also take into consideration the need to meet with those in the education and health, ministries of education and health, very important. And that's, given the importance of education and health in the area of sustainable development. You can't talk about sustainable development without education and health. I also think, since Nigeria is a federation, it's also important that IMF, should make effort within that period to consult with a number of state officials, state and local government officials, where possible, because that is the way they can really get the, grassroots, feedback or input. So in addition to the education, health that I mentioned, in addition to states and local government officials, where possible, the IMF team should be meeting with the labor. Okay, labor. So it's important that is done. If they must not miss out on implementation challenges, they must not miss out on the the real fiscal, what I call fiscal realities, in their report. We know that even the states, the subnationals, play a big role in terms of implementing government, fiscal policy. So having said that, I return to the original point I made about this year's report. Unlike what we saw in previous years, because I recall this is one theme to have been following, their consultations and missions to Nigeria. Some time ago, I also did an article that was published, widely published in many, media houses, about the recommendations of the IMF. Each time they do these consultations, they come up with their reports. But this time around, one can say that the report is largely favorable. You saw them, they started with commending the government, for the reforms that are already in place in the last 2 years, with specific reference to the fuel subsidy removal and the unification of exchange rates, and also the halt, if you like, in the CBN ways and means. The excessive printing of currency we saw not so long ago to finance government deficit. So they lauded all that, and that, of course, resulted in a relative macroeconomic stability we're experiencing today. GDP growth rate in 2024, according to that report for Nigeria, was at 3.4%, on the back of improvement in oil output, largely, and also on the back of robust growth in the services sector. I think they mentioned all of that. They also mentioned the fact that investor confidence in the economy has improved significantly, which is also why Nigeria has also been able to access the Eurobond market. We've seen increase in foreign, particularly foreign portfolio investments. And they had a lot of pat on the back for the central bank, the monetary policy, management, so to say. The forex management measures by the central bank, we have seen that translate into stability in the naira. We've also seen that translate into the convergence between the official and the parallel market premium. They lauded the central bank, as I mentioned earlier, for also not continuing the practice of ways and means. So when you look at all that in totality, I would say the report is largely favorable. When I say balance, when I use the word balance, I'm also noting the fact that they mentioned too that despite all of this, what appears to be macroeconomic gains, have not really translated to real tangible benefits for all Nigerians. They also mentioned that we also have an increase in poverty and also having increase in food insecurity. So largely, it's a balanced report. It's a favorable report on the average.
Interesting stuff. But Prof, let me ask you, how do we recalibrate Nigeria's fiscal policy, budget expectations to reflect current realities as stated in this report?
Yeah, if you look at their policy recommendations, they made recommendations in relation to 4 areas. One, fiscal policy, monetary policy, financial sector, management, as well as structural reforms. Now, on fiscal policy, they talked about they're advising Nigeria to adopt a neutral fiscal policy stance, a neutral fiscal stance. And what does that mean? That means that Nigeria shouldn't overspend, okay, and then of course at the same time you shouldn't try to cut your spending to a point where you also hurt growth. So as far as spending is concerned, you maintain a balanced approach. So that's what neutral fiscal stance. My understanding of neutral fiscal stance that the IMF was referring to, and that's also why the IMF was talking about recalibrating the 2025 budget. As you know, 2025 budget has been based on $75 per barrel and 2.06 million barrels per day, of oil output. It has also been based on, in terms of exchange rate, 1,500 naira, to the dollar. Now, you look at all these benchmarks, none of them, you can say, has been met. Today, we know that the oil price has become very volatile, understandably so, as a result of global shocks, what we are witnessing, globally. So we've seen this, swings in oil price. Today, the last time I checked, it came down to $66, dollars per barrel. Only last week, not too long ago, it went above $70, at even touched $75, and we were clapping. Then all of a sudden, it started dropping. So the volatility in the international crude oil price, the fact that we've not been able to hit the 2 million barrels, 2.06 million barrels we have budgeted. When you take all that into cognizance, IMF is now advising that we should try to, recalibrate means try to spend within your revenues, in order not to increase, in order not to worsen the debt situation, in order to resort to additional borrowing. That's what they're saying. And also in order not to, exacerbate the inflationary pressure. Because when you are challenged with dwindling revenues and you're also spending, okay, what that means is that you end up borrowing and then you also end up fueling inflation. So that's why they are saying we should recalibrate. And to a large extent, I agree with that recommendation. They've also said that we should also find a way not to also cut spending, so as not to hurt growth. Remember, they have projected growth for 2025 at 3.4%. Last year it was 3.4%, and they also think the trajectory will be maintained. So that's what neutral fiscal balance means. You try to establish a balance. Now, how do you ensure that the essentials are met even when revenues are dwindling? And they also provided recommendation. They said Nigeria can fall back to recoup, subsidy savings, and of course stay on the path of the tax reforms. So by the time we are using subsidy savings, to fill the gap, we may not have need, in that, according to them, to resort to additional borrowing. So as I said, I agree with that position that if we are having this uncertainty in terms of particularly the oil revenues, we should find a way to recalibrate and emphasize more on the quality of the spend. They also mentioned that the country should focus more on the quality of what we are spending, and particularly with respect to channeling these funds to education and health. That was clearly mentioned in their report. So that's precisely what they meant by fiscal neutral stance and ensuring that you recalibrate.
Prof.
You don't continue to spend based on the $75 per barrel, 75 years assumption when it's not, it's not realistic.
Now, Prof, let me follow up with that, because in your first submission you talked about the report alluding to the fact that we still have people poverty line, we still have people, trying to grapple with the fallout of the policy reforms of government. And that brings me to enhancing the social support safety net for vulnerable ones. That is also something in that report that I'd like you to speak around. How do you see us also instituting that without politicizing it, and making it, let it get to those who really, the vulnerable ones that are vulnerable indeed? How do you think that can be done? Because really, you hear of initiatives here and there, and sometimes it doesn't trickle down to those that need to get these funds and, this support.
Yeah, thanks, Tolu. Again, I want to reiterate that when they talked about quality of spend, okay, the emphasis is on, spending on public services, particularly education and health. There is need to increase the funding of these sectors because they are critical and they are fundamental when you are talking about sustainable, development. Yes, I also saw that they talked about increasing scaling, to use the word, scaling the the cash transfer program or cash transfer scheme, to reach more vulnerable persons. That is the one aspect I have always, had reservations. I have not been in support of using cash transfer for us here in Nigeria. It's possible they can cite cases, some jurisdictions or countries where that, has been working. But our experience here has shown that that is not something we should really be relying on. Last time when I was on your program, if you recall, it was a time we had, the government was going to get some loans or grants or whatever from the World Bank as a soft facility, for the cash transfer. And I said it doesn't make sense for us to go and borrow money, no matter how concessional the money is, the loan is, just to distribute by way of cash to the vulnerable, knowing full well that again we can't really be very targeted about it in terms of knowing those ones that are actually vulnerable. We don't have the data. Even when they say they have the data, I don't think we have the data, to enable us, do that. So the best is to see, explore other ways by which we can channel these funds. Now, if the interventions are such that, credit, soft credit or soft money facility is given to micro businesses, of course that should be supported. And that's also why I want to say that this board that was inaugurated today, I think is a right step in the right direction. Talking about the commercial credit, scheme. It's one good scheme that this administration, has put in place, and another scheme that will ensure that, money, gets to the hands of small businesses, for them to grow. You can also tie this with even the recent tax reforms. If you look at the new tax laws that we have, the Nigerian Tax Act, for example, that has made it possible now for small businesses, if you are small businesses with a turnover of less than 50 million, being exempted from tax. Yes, they are going to be exempted from tax, but they're also going to be required to file tax returns. And we have I've always said that one advantage that we'll have is that it will also enable the government to have the data about these small businesses that are not now going to pay tax, but government will have their data such that the whole idea now will be to support them to grow to a point where they can now enter the tax bracket and now begin to contribute to the to the treasury or to the purse. Okay, so that support, those interventions must be based on data. And that's also why, if you look at the IMF report emphasized credible data. You need to have credible data for you to be able to plan, this intervention. When you don't have data, you start you end up throwing away money. So I think that the cash transfer scheme, conventional cash transfer scheme, as it is being done now, I think is something we should have a rethink and see how much of the funds we can also channel to other areas that will assist the vulnerable. A principle of public expenditure. One of the major principles we learn even in school talks about the principle of maximum social benefit. We have the principle of economy, we have the principle of sanction, but the one that strikes me is the principle of maximum social benefit. So if you have ₦1 to spend, you're asking yourself at all times, as a public official, how can I use this ₦1 to benefit, to achieve maximum benefit for the majority of the population? So it's not about now sharing the money to just a few persons that will consume them, okay? But how to use that money to, if you like, stimulate productivity, stimulate production. So at the end of the day, you are not giving them fish. At the end of the day, you're giving them the hook, to catch the fish.
Interesting one. Let's wrap up with the tax law that you touched on, because I know you're also party to this, a member of that committee. So finally, pen has been put to paper. Prof, what are your expectations? I spoke to an analyst and he told me that we need to manage our expectations so very well with regards to this.
Well, for me, it's, my position is one bold major step that will ultimately help to stimulate this economy. But before, well, that's the if you like, my position on it. I would like to touch on something before we wrap up this, and that has to do with what the report has said with respect to the monetary policy, the central bank. It says that the central bank should use exchange rate as a shock absorber. Shock absorber. Shock absorber means that you should not try to control the exchange rate, when you are experiencing shocks, external shocks. So when there is an external shock, for example, you should allow the exchange rate to, you should allow the naira to depreciate, okay? And then when, of course, it is favorable, we can allow it to appreciate. But it has also said that the central bank should also be in a position to intervene, from time to time in order to ensure that you don't have swings in exchange rates. You can see why I said that report is balanced.
Balanced, okay? Yes.
And it cited this, yes, it cited, reasons. It said, one, because of the shallowness of the foreign exchange market, limited number of participants. It also said, because of the fact that Nigeria currently has, elevated, what it calls elevated external rolling needs. What that means is that Nigeria has some external loans that will mature pretty soon. By November, the 1.1 billion euro bond, outstanding will mature, and Nigeria will be expected to pay back that money, bullet repayments. But there are also other loans, external loans that will require refinancing, which will be required to be rolled over. So Nigeria should also be conscious of that. Okay. So those are the things the reports have said, which I think I said earlier on, very balanced. Now, coming back to the issue of the tax thing you asked me about, as I said, if you look at the four of them, whether you're talking about the Nigerian Tax Act or you're talking about the Nigerian Revenue Service Establishment Act or the Joint Revenue Board Establishment Act, or even the Nigerian Tax Administration Act, the four of them, okay, you will realize that everything in that act, okay, is geared towards helping us have a better, an improved and enhanced, business environment. And my summary of the entire act is that these are tax laws that are pro-poor. These are tax laws that are pro-people. These are tax laws that are pro-development. And because they are progressive, because they are equitable, okay, the real challenge now is how to ensure that the increased revenues we are going to have as a result of all of that, expanding the tax net, because that's what it also entails, that they are channeled properly, okay, particularly in the provision of public, services. I keep emphasizing education, health, food. These three are very critical. By the time we channel them to education, health, and food, then you can be sure that we have not only succeeded in having a progressive and equitable tax system, we've also succeeded in having, a progressive and equitable spend, okay? Because the spending aspect is also important. What
Very
do we
important.
do with the money?
All right.
In order to improve trust, in order to, establish the social contract, if you like, social contract between the government and the citizens.
And the people. Professor Uche Owaleke, President, Capital Markets Academics of Nigeria. Thank you as always. Interesting conversation, educating. Have a great weekend. I'll see you again soon.
Thank you so much, Tolu.
All right, then.